You got a good list there, Jim?
Yes, Tom, I have a list of questions from some of our previous training programs. Some of them you've covered quite thoroughly. Others might be appropriate to do a little bit of a recap.
Okay.
Why don't I just ask the questions and I'll let you field the answers.
Okay, if I can't answer, you will?
If you can't answer, I will ask another question.
Okay. See what we can do.
One of the first most common asked questions is, what do the terms friable and non-friable mean? And even though you've answered that previously, I think it might be a good idea just to quickly re-answer.
Sometimes that gets to be a fine line, doesn't it? What's friable, what's non-friable? After we went through our first inspections, we found that EPA was maybe changing definitions on what was friable, and we found even some of those harder surfacing materials that were sprayed on. If we could get a powder off of that, they were classifying it friable. Now, I've had some school districts we've gone into, and they said, that's not friable. And I have to say, no. If EPA walked in here, they'd say it's friable, and we have to classify it the same way. Ceiling tiles may or may not be friable because you may not be able to get that powder off of them. Very obviously, non-friable would be floor tiles, hard wall plaster materials. Transite board, I've heard some discussion on. If, again, a powder can be gotten off of it, then I'd consider it friable. Most of the time, I classify transite as a non-friable. Does that hit most of those? Or
do you have any other specific examples that we could use for friable and non-friable asbestos?
I think most of your thermal insulations obviously are friable once they're outside of their container. In other words, if they're outside the jacket, if we've got a rip or anything open, that's going to be a friable material. So when we go in and look as inspectors and we find a material down along the bottom, we would say we have friable material, it's damaged here, it needs repair. So any open areas like that. Softer ceilings, most of the fire sprays, I don't think I've found any except one or two cementatious ones that I would consider they would be friable. Some are like cement. Cement materials are not friable.
Here's a question that is asked a number of times. Specifically, how does the AHERA law apply to me as a maintenance or custodial worker?
As a worker, you are responsible, not responsible, I should say, the LEA is responsible to give you training. That's the #1 step. That's how AHERA affects you.
So I should, if I'm a worker, I should expect a minimum of 2 hours training.
That's correct. You've got 2 hours of training. Now, this tape will take you part of the way, and as I end this too, we're going to mention that the designated person has to list out where the ACM is in the building. So that's another aspect of how AHERA affects them. Another aspect of how it affects them is they should not be cleaning up asbestos-containing materials without additional training. So it puts a limit on who can do what. It tells who has to have certain training, and it also says through the inspection and management plan that we have to define where asbestos is, what kind of asbestos it is, what the classification or assessment, whether it's friable or non-friable, whether it's damaged, whether it's potentially damageable, and whether it's significantly damaged. You're familiar with all those, but that would affect that individual too. He can go then and grab a plan and know where to look.
That really leads right into the next question that I have, and that's, why is a personal review of the asbestos management plan required of me if I'm a maintenance or a custodial worker? Why should I be interested in reviewing that plan?
You ever put up racks or chalkboards or anything like that? You'd have to say, yeah. Do you ever change light bulbs?
Probably.
Do you ever get in those areas in a boiler room or have to crawl a tunnel if you're part of that?
Sure.
Those all affect you. So as this individual would say, why do I have to know that? Just to know where the material is and what condition it is before you're into it. Like I said, when I popped that one tile with this superintendent and the asbestos fell to the floor, he should have known. I didn't know where it was. He was showing me, but that should have been known ahead of time, that there's asbestos, and very carefully taking that tile down.
Another question that has come up many times is, if an area contains asbestos, does it present a health hazard to me as a worker occupying that area? And I'm assuming that when that question is asked, that the person is not necessarily disturbing the asbestos, they're just concerned about its presence.
Good question. And the answer really is no. It is not a health problem or a health hazard. We've conducted many air monitor tests in schools that have asked this question. I was in one school that had asbestos inside of an air plenum, and it was a sprayed-on type of fireproofing. And even though tests were run for the air, we found that there was virtually no asbestos fibers in the air. From all the studies I've read and the different publications that I've gotten and gone through, and I've tried to really keep on top of that, Jim, of is there really, a health hazard to the person that's in a building that has it? And the answer is no, as long as it's intact and there's not fibers being released and they're in there breathing it.
Going along with that question then is really the next one. What should I do if I find or discover damaged asbestos material within the building? I think at that point we'd have to assume that the worker has observed the material, they have suspected that it's asbestos, they've referred to the plan, they have determined that it is, and at this point they know that damaged, friable material does exist in the building. Let's say that it just happened, something caused a pipe wrap to be damaged. What's the first step that that person should take?
Let's put it in the boiler room first, and then we'll talk about maybe an open area. If it's in the boiler room and they find you come across this damaged area, that individual should, well, it depends on his training too, but he should first notify his immediate supervisor that we've got damaged material down there, and that supervisor should be the one to make that decision on how to deal with that. Again, we go back to major and minor fiber releases. Most of those situations will be minor. They're under 3 lineal feet, under 3 square feet. The supervisor or the designated person can then say, here's the response. In fact, I don't think I mentioned it, but one of the responsibilities of the designated person is to be able to and to make decisions regarding fiber releases. So that person should find out of what has happened. And then from there, the cleaning operation would be designed or directed by that designated person or immediate supervisor to clean that up. Most of the time it can be cleaned up fairly quickly without any or minimal fiber release, and a rewrap around maybe those edges that have been frayed or opened up. That asbestos material also has to be dealt with in a proper way, and that's also outlined in a HERA. If you're in a classroom and all of a sudden you come into that classroom and you notice a bunch of, say, ceiling material is delaminated and come down, best situation there is just to leave that classroom, lock that door, put a sign on it and say no entrance until, again, you contact that supervisor. I don't know if that's how you'd handle it or suggest, but I see the need to stop entrance into there until someone who is in that authority position decides what to do with that.
So it seems as if the most important response of the custodial maintenance worker is to notify their immediate supervisor if at any time they suspect there may have been a fiber release.
I would say so. It's not their position really to say, oh, I'll just clean all this mess up.
So if any questions, ask.
Any questions, ask.
One of the final question is one that has come up a number of times, especially with some of our long service workers, and that's why all this concern about asbestos now when we've been working and breathing it for the past 30 or 40 years. And before I give you a chance, Tom, I might just like to add that if we'll think of asbestos similar to possibly the lead content of gasoline. You know, for many, many years, the gasoline that we burned in our automobiles was leaded, and it was put in for a very specific reason. Well, as technology changed and as the scientific community became aware that lead indeed did present certain health risks to the population, those levels of lead were reduced significantly, and now we're to the point where we actually have lead-free or as lead-free fuel as it is possible to make. And I think if we'll look at the asbestos regulations the same way, this is really the third set of asbestos regulations we've been asked to deal with in school buildings. And so we have gone through a stage of improving controls on asbestos-containing materials, and now we have a set of regulations that are very specific and outline in more or less exacting terms the types of action that we're supposed to be taking given the particular conditions of the asbestos. So I think that it's just another situation where as society we've identified what apparently is a health risk to the population, and we are now taking steps to reduce that risk to the minimum level possible.
Yeah, that's the key to it, is our society now is to a point where we want to reduce health risks that are occupational or work-related health risks. And we've got the liberty to go and drive our car. That's maybe more of a health risk than I realized driving back from here than some of the asbestos exposures, but we are in that society that desires to reduce that as close to zero as we can. We've got the ability. This isn't a real technical type of thing we're talking. We're talking about cleaning things up properly, or sealing them up properly, or taking them out properly. So it's a very easy step to eliminate some potential health hazards. That's it for questions.
That's it for questions.
You probably have some more questions, and right now, as part of this training, as this tape ends, there's going to be, or should be, your designated person right there to answer those questions. He's also going to tell you, if he has all this materials in front of him, which he should, the locations of asbestos-containing material within your building or the buildings within your district. It is his responsibility to make sure you know that, and he's there to answer those questions that you might have that we may not have covered. I hope this has been informative and it's given you maybe a different look, but a more complete look on asbestos, its uses, the problems, and now what you can do about it. I appreciate your attention.